From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this Labor Day weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. China making some surprising buys this week.
This looks to me like just a negotiation 101.
But USDA now expects exports to continue to fade, and the reality is a building ag trade deficit here in the U.S. One rancher's quest to help cattlemen build better cow herds. That's been a journey for over 60 years.
We'll introduce you to the unique business model here at Jorgenson Land and Cattle, which revolves around conservation.
Easing the load on a laborious job.
Surely there's got to be a better way to do that than forking it up there the European way.
How mechanization transforms the hay business and is now an iconic collector's piece to preserve a piece of agricultural history. Now for the news, new forecasts show ag exports next year could see another decline. USDA releasing its forecasts indicating a widening trade deficit. The agency projecting 2025 exports at $169.5 billion. That's down $4 billion from this current year and down $26.5 billion from 2 years ago. Meanwhile, imports keep rising. USDA says 2025 could end up with an ag trade deficit of over $42 billion.
A lot of this is tied to falling commodity prices. And then if we look at some other things around the world, maybe a slower Chinese economy, continued strength of the U.S. dollar, China diversifying its sources for trade, perhaps a little bit weaker on export competitiveness for ourselves. Those are all things which are posing some challenges for our exports.
Exports to China are projected to be $24 billion, but Canada is expected to continue to be the top spot for the U.S. with forecasts of more than $29 billion, followed by Mexico at almost $29 billion. A developing story we're following out of the West. Wildfires are raging in several areas, especially in northern Wyoming. Two of the larger fires are burning outside the city of Gillette, which is in the northeastern part of the state. The Flat Rock Fire has burned through almost 53,000 acres. Further west is the House Draw Fire, consuming more than 174,000 acres. And to the north is the Constitution Fire, which has burned more than 24,000 acres. A third fire is burning in the Wyoming-Montana state line. The Remington Fire has consumed more than 196,000 acres. Rancher Pat Dennis reporting that cattle losses from that fire are high. Firefighters were aided a bit in fighting some of the blazes thanks to rains earlier this week. A judge is blocking a rule allowing H-2A workers to unionize in 17 states. A U.S. district judge in Georgia issuing an injunction against the Labor Department rule. It would have allowed farm workers on H-2A visas to unionize. The ruling blocks the regulation in several states, including Georgia, Louisiana, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and North Dakota, with the judge stating that the Biden administration overstepped its authority. The National Council of Agricultural Employers hailed the decision as a victory for farmers, while the Labor Department has argued the rule was necessary to prevent abuse and ensure fair treatment for H-2A workers. The rule was set to take effect this week. That's it for the news. High heat this week packed a punch, intensifying the drought for some. We'll have a check of your forecast coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Pioneer. Pioneer brand corn has the home field advantage with rigorous local testing to give you a winning season. Pioneer brand corn, your best year starts here. U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
Well, according to the latest U.S. Drought Monitor, exceptional drought now showing up in Ohio this year. It's the first time Ohio has seen severe drought in the state since 2012 and the largest area of D3 and D4 that we have seen since the monitor was created in 1999. And with the heat this week, we did see drought grow in quite a few areas of the country. Meteorologist Jack Van Meter joining us now with more.
Taking a look at the current drought monitor, we can see parts of the United States that really need that moisture, unfortunately, just haven't been able to receive it due to the high pressure ridge that's moving over the country, partly associated with the reason that everybody right now seems to be seeing those very warm temperatures, especially now on the East Coast. We can see, unfortunately, things out in West Virginia have not improved at all. It's actually starting to move more north into southern Ohio as well. As we can see, West Texas is still unbelievably dry. Most of Kansas as well, seeing those drought conditions start to move in the moderate and even some isolated parts of severe drought. And obviously we can see up in the northwest, very dry conditions still persist out there. And again, all due to our jet stream. Putting the jet stream in motion, we can see looks like another ridge is building in the country for our Labor Day week ahead. Again, this is just looking forward, looking like another ridge of high pressure right here, going to bring high temperatures, unfortunately low amounts of precipitation to most of the country. We do have a little bit of a dip associated with a smaller trough, just only for the northern part of the country. We're talking the Montanas and the Dakotas as well. Looking at precipitation for the next week, we can see again much of the Great Plains are going to be fairly dry. Again, it's going to be because of the ridge building in, but we're going to be seeing above average precipitation, especially down in Texas. That's going to be mainly due to some thunderstorm downdrafts and downpours that we see accumulating down there for much of the south. Then we'll just be seeing some nice gentle rain accumulations for much of the East Coast, and hopefully West Virginia and actually parts of Ohio as well can start to dry out a little bit as well and start to build up some more moisture that is much needed. Do want to talk about some of the risk going into the weekend. We do have a risk of severe storms tomorrow and also on Saturday as well. But good news is, look, that T word is not being used, tornado, which is great news. That risk then moves further east into Pennsylvania and parts of New York as well as West Virginia for the weekend, just to keep that in mind. And again, here's that precipitation outlook. And as we can see, again, very, very dry conditions working its way into the country. Again, especially for the northern Great Lakes states, Wisconsin, parts of the UP also staying very dry. As we can see down south, especially on the Gulf of Mexico, seeing a lot of moisture.
Thanks, Jack. Well, what impact did the heat have on the potential crop size of this year's crop? Plus, are the lows in when it comes to commodity prices? We have John Sheave as well as Dan Bossy joining us for a marketing discussion next. Well, welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. John Sheave as well as Dan Bossy joining us this weekend for our marketing roundtables. Okay, I know we're a week out of Pro Farmer Crop Tour, but those final numbers that came in from Pro Farmer specifically, their estimates, which are their own estimates, but based on what they saw on Crop Tour. Corn yield of 181 bushels per acre, production pegged at 14.98 billion bushels. Soybean yield a whopping 54.9 bushels per acre, production at 4.74 billion bushels. When you look at that 181.1 for corn, 54.9 bushels per acre for soybeans, does that align with Ag Resource?
Yeah, we're a couple bushels or 1 to 2 bushels lower on corn, Tyne. We're concerned about the foliar diseases. We're concerned about the push of Mother Nature to get us to black layer. We think that starch accumulation is not as much as it should be, so we're down a couple of bushels. And then we look at beans, we're maybe a bushel lower. So it's a big bean. They're still big crops, don't get me wrong, but maybe they're not as big as we thought they're in the early part of August or middle of August going forward. But we'll see how Mother Nature brings us home over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Weather's still important as we head into the middle of September.
Yeah, weather is still important, and I think this week was a reminder of that. John, we did see prices move positively a few days here this week. Was that really weather-driven, or was there another factor that was moving prices?
I think it's certainly, you could say that beans probably showed some positive movement on the fact that it's hot and dry, and this is the time that you need it not to be hot and dry. So, but the problem is that's only going to be on the extremes of the belt. You're talking southeast Nebraska there. You're talking northwest Ohio. Those areas are some of the concern. But I think overall, I think this crop's doing pretty well. It has enough water, and humidity is good. And so if it is humid, that's helping all the things on the crop. So I think we're doing just fine there. in general, I think this crop's going to finish out okay. Maybe what we really did is, everyone wanted to talk about how, we can't hit a 181 crop. And statistically speaking, we should have easily been able to hit a 181 crop. The fact that we aren't talking about a 190 crop this year is probably more amazing, because that would have only been about a 5% increase. And we've seen those in 2014 and 2009, where we saw these really big increases in yield. So I think we should be very happy from a price standpoint that we don't have this massively huge crop out there that could potentially have been out there. That's why I still think we're definitely above 181. It's hard to peg this with this heat at the very end. I think that definitely did hurt things, but to just say that it's backing way off, I don't know. I think we're still up above 182, probably even above 183.
Well, so John, you think maybe we could be above 182, 183. Dan, you're thinking we're below 181. No matter what, you look at the fundamentals today, you look at the technicals today, do you think we will see this typical price pressure during the harvest season?
As you talk to farmers, the month of August was a time frame, and I always go that farmers are usually price takers. They're not price makers, but there are these time frames where farmers make prices, and one has been in the last 2 to 3 weeks where we've been sweeping bins and get rid of old crop grain. I think that's been the pressuring factor on Chicago. As I look at the CFTC Commitment of Traders report data, my fund clients haven't been increasing or decreasing substantially. It's been, I believe, the farm movement which has taken the markets down, which tells me that as I think forward, if farmers aren't big sellers during the harvest, maybe we don't get that big push to the downside. We'll see, but I'm kind of of the opinion seasonal lows are in the formation process right now, but that's our thinking at Ag Resource.
John, what about you? You think we've put the lows in this market?
If we haven't put it in, it's definitely close. Statistically speaking, over the last 30 years, August 30th to November 30th, you're going to see the low occur 50% of the time. And so we're right here at a low or very close to it. So did it happen a couple of days ago, or is it going to happen over the next 2 or 3 months? It should happen. Are we within 20, 30 cents? Probably. I think the downside is getting to becoming very limited from this standpoint. But I don't see where the upside potential is, because you have this massive carry in beans, corn, and wheat, and none of them, those carries are so big that I don't know that the crop can counter those carries. And so because of that, I think that you're looking at a certainly on corn, $4 is going to really limit that decrease, because I think as the farmer sits there with a number now under, they're still sitting on a 23 crop, or at least a few bushels left. They don't have any of this 24 crop priced at all. They are going to have to drive income in by the end of the year. And so I think that's going to put pressure on it, because they didn't have a good 23 price. They're going to have to drive income to cover some of those expenses. Otherwise, they're going to be showing losses. And I don't think they want to do that on their taxes.
Well, we have seen some positive signs, some recent buys from China, but China is also sending some mixed messages. Imagine that. We'll get into that with both Dan and John when we come back. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Well, Dan, we've seen China come in with more frequent buys of soybeans, but also sorghum. And what's interesting about that is China is asking domestic traders to import less feed grains, specifically sorghum, as ample supplies and weaker than expected demand weigh on prices in China. So give us some clarity here. What is going on?
Well, it's a little bit like what maybe Turkey is doing in the wheat market. It's a little bit like other countries are looking at where grain prices get low, so they try to limit the imports, and that's what China's doing. I'm being told from Chinese sources that this is a short-term phenomena. The Chinese told us back last May that they didn't want to push on the corn envelope in terms of imports, and now they're adding sorghum and barley. I'm also hearing that by end of October, early November, that the Chinese will be back, and that I shouldn't adjust my import number of 23 million tons.
John, what do you think? Could we see Chinese government ask grain buyers to import less of other commodities?
I don't put a lot of stock in it. If they need corn, they come and buy it. If they don't need corn, they're not going to buy it. And so, are you going to tell people that? It seems to me it's just going to be a head fake.
Well, we're also gearing up for South American, their new crop. And when you look at some of these planted acreage estimates out of specifically like Argentina, Dan, we're hearing that we could see Argentina plant less corn this year. What are the numbers coming out of Ag Resource right now? What do you think?
Yeah, we think that our office down in Brasilia thinks that the Argentinian farmer plants around 18% less corn, plants about 12% more soybeans. It's kind of a change that they'll plant less corn because of leaf hoppers and corn stunt disease, which really hit their crop last year. When I look at Brazil, because Brazilian farmers are now losing money and planting soybeans for the first time since 2009, they are rearing back, and at least some of the surveys saying that they will plant no more than last year, maybe 1% or 2% below. So with that in mind, the market's kind of doing its job in terms of limitation.
John, I mean, okay, let's say we do see Brazil cut acreage by 1% to 2%, Argentina cut acreage by 18%. Is that enough looking at the world stocks right now?
Well, it isn't. I mean, Argentina isn't a very big producer. They're the fourth largest producer on corn, or third or fourth, whatever, but it's so far down, it doesn't matter. I mean, we got states in the US that are bigger than what Argentina produces. So losing, I think, Dan, you mentioned before the show started that they were going to lose 3 million metric ton. Okay, that's 60 million bushels. Okay, we need to move at least 60 million bushels more, and it still wouldn't affect our prices. So I don't think that matters as much. Beans, it's just nice that they're not going to expand. The prices that we're experiencing right now, I mean, I know a lot of farmers are out there wondering, when's this going to end? What's the complaint? The reason the board is going down is to drive someone to quit producing. You can't stop the U.S. from producing corn because we're up against our harvest. We don't plant for another 6 months. And so what you're trying to do is stop the next crop. Next crop to go in is the Argentina crop, and then followed that by the secondary Brazilian crop, because the first crop's all fed there in Brazil, so it doesn't really matter that much. So you're just trying to stop someone from planting corn so that we can finally come around and plant the corn in the spring. So I think you're just dealing with an issue here where you're just going to have prices cheap through at least Christmas until that Argentina crop can't be planted any further.
Dan, real quick, switch gears a little bit to cattle, because a bit of a surprise in cattle on feed. The report from USDA last week showed 11.1 million cattle and calves on feed as of August 1st. That was up slightly, but the big surprise coming in placements in feedlots during July, which totaled 1.70 million head, up 6% from last year. Why was that such a big surprise, Dan?
Well, we were looking for numbers. In other words, we at some point feel we're going to get to this expansionary phase in the cattle cycle, and we're going to start holding back sheep stock, and that's just not happening to any large degree. Cow slaughter is coming down, but not the sheep stock retention. So a big placement number last month. It looks like we'll have another good placement number in August, and so it's kind of ganging up as rates and cattle keep going up and beef prices are dropping. So the market in cattle is probably non-directional right now. I can't see a big rally. There may be a big break to buyback demand forthcoming, but overall trends, I think, are still higher longer term. This is just like last year where we got a lot of indigestion between September, October, and then find a low in early November and go from there.
Dan, John, thank you so much for joining us this weekend. We need to take a quick break, and then we're checking in with Machinery Pete for Tractor Tales.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. This week we're off to northern Indiana to check out a 1967 John Deere 110 garden tractor with hydraulics.
We're looking at the first John Deere 110 that I bought on my own. This is a 1967 110H. John Deere first entered the garden tractor market in 1963 with the first model 110. And it essentially looked identical to this, and they were called the round fender body style because of the obvious round fenders. And then in 1968, they switched over to the square fender body style, which has one large fender stamping. I believe they came out with the hydraulic lift attachment in 1966. So this one being a 1967, 2-year only tractor. It's not the rarest attachment ever. It's a lot more common on square fender tractors, but it is a little more desirable and rarer on round fender tractor. This one is a pure show pony. When I got it, it had a mower deck on it. And notice that none of my tractors have mower decks. I'm not really an attachment guy. And the reason for that is because I'm afraid to get dirt on this one. When I restored this one, I kind of had a gut feeling at the time that this might be my only round fender. So I decided to really go over the top with it. This is my only one that has a full-on $1,000 base coat, clear coat paint job. This thing is nicer than when it left John Deere. I need to give a special shout out to my good friend Tom Molnar. He's who painted this for me. The guy is an absolute artist. He restores Studebakers. The paint job is worth more than the whole thing. $1,000 maybe on a good day, but you know what? I love it.
It's a South Dakota cattle operation that's been around for 60 years with the goal of helping cattlemen build better cow herds. But today, their focus is also sustaining the cattle industry for the next 60 years. We'll show you how next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, one ranch family's quest to help cattlemen build better cow herds is a journey that's been evolving for the past 60 years. And now the cattle operation is focused on impactful changes that could help sustain the cattle industry for the next 60 years. Michelle Rook travels to South Dakota and introduces us to the Jorgenson Land and Cattle.
Here at Jorgenson Land and Cattle at Ideal, South Dakota, their success revolves around their unique and top-tier business model, which includes livestock, soils, and wildlife. But each of those pillars revolves around conservation.
It starts with their 12,000 acres of cropland, which has been 100% no-till since 1991. Chief Agronomy Officer Brian Jorgenson says the initial goal was time and labor savings.
Then we started seeing structural and physical changes happen in that soil system,
including increasing organic matter by 1 to 2%, which aids in soil infiltration.
And when you got those big 2-3 inch rains, the water wasn't running off and causing gully washes. It was actually soaking in and being stored by the profile for the use of the crops later down the road.
Another key to soil health was diversifying their rotations to mimic Mother Nature.
So we have about a 5 to 6 year rotation that will do like 2 years of a cereal grain, 2 years of a row crop, and then maybe a soybean or an alfalfa, and then back to a spring grain.
Plus, they follow any crop they can with a diverse cover crop mix.
The cover crop is important in that it stretches the amount of time that we have a living root in that system.
He firmly believes, though, the secret to making cover crops work is having livestock.
They're going to cycle the nutrients out there. They're going to be able to consume any of the carbon that we have out there.
That's key when you're feeding the largest Angus bull herd in the country. However, the same soil health principles apply to grasslands. So CEO Nick Jorgenson says 7 years ago they adopted rotational grazing for their cow herd.
It's been a growing focus for us that I think really has made a measurable difference in our pasture land's ability to carry cows and be resilient, in times of drought or other stress like that.
Jorgensons are also leveraging technology to save labor and costs with virtual fencing.
We can get very granular about where the cattle graze, when they graze there, and at the same time we know where they are all the time, and we don't have to put infrastructure out there.
Plus they compost all their manure from the feed yard.
So we've got a more spreadable, better product to spread out on our soil.
The third pillar of their business is wildlife.
Where we're standing right now is the Lazy J Grand Lodge, which we've had since 2012. It's basically a hunting lodge.
We do guided pheasant hunts and weddings and things like that, and we're actually in the middle of developing a golf course here.
And their conservation practices help them provide habitat for the pheasants, but they also utilize cover crops.
It creates really good habitat for them in the fall that provides a food source and a cover source that they wouldn't have otherwise.
This agritainment business has helped them diversify and spread their risks, but at the core is still their desire to preserve these resources for the future.
Conservation is baked into just about everything we do here at Jorgenson Land and Cattle.
Producers got to see that firsthand on the Trust in Beef Sustainable Ranchers Tour.
They measure the carbon that they're hauling into the feed yard and the carbon that they got to haul back out of the feed yard back to where it came from to be able to sustain it. Because if you continually haul off the nutrients and the products off of that, then your land deteriorates.
Participants also got to see Jorgenson's cattle handling and vaccine protocols.
If you have sick cattle or you have cattle that have a lot of parasites, you're going to utilize more resources than you need to get the same amount of gains.
And Jorgenson's rely on a trusted financial partner that understands their sustainability journey.
That return on investment is not just going to happen immediately, it's going to take time. So it might be some zero interest lending or some other programs there. We can help refer them to government programs or also maybe some third-party assistance as well.
For producers just getting started, there are various partners that can provide financial and educational resources plus data.
That can allow ranchers to understand more about their soils, their water, their animals, their locations, all these different pieces. And so we provide all those tools as part of our program free for the ranchers so they can really build a robust and really optimize their grazing programs.
Ducks Unlimited has also helped producers conserve 1 million acres of wetlands and grasslands, which are habitat for ducks.
The work that we do is often helping them with grazing systems. We do cost share on fence and water structures. We help with cover crops. That'll be helpful with forage at other times of the year for ranchers, and also helps with water quality.
All this helps producers reach broader sustainability goals set by the food chain.
As high choice or prime, that sustainability issue needs to start sooner rather than later in, of course, your genetics and your feed routines. That's the message I send to our producer all the time.
To be environmentally sound, socially acceptable, and financially viable. But what it really means is, when it comes to at the producer level, it just comes down to better ranching. Continually improving your operation.
And leaving it better for the next generation. I'm Michelle Rook for U.S. Farm Report.
Thanks, Michelle. And there's one more stop left on the Sustainable Ranchers Tour. That's September 11th and 12th at Black Leg Ranch in McKenzie, North Dakota. All right, when we come back, Canadian railroads are up and running again, but the labor battle may be far from over. A glimpse of Ag Around the World is next. Now for a glimpse of Ag Around the World. Trains are running again in Canada. That's after an order was issued requiring there be no rail network stoppage during an ongoing labor dispute. But thanks to some future legal challenges that have been promised, that labor dispute may be far from over. The Canada Industrial Relations Board issuing the order imposing binding arbitration between the union and the rail companies. Canadian National restarted operations last Friday, just a day after it locked out workers. And Canadian Pacific Kansas City ordered workers to return this past Monday. The railroads have said it could take several weeks to fully recover from last week's short lockout because they began gradually shutting down their networks more than a week earlier, leaving shipments stranded on customers' loading docks and at ports across the country. About 30% of freight the two railroads carry crosses the U.S.-Canadian border, carrying $1 billion worth of shipments every day, including fertilizer. But the Canadian rail companies have promised a legal challenge. Canada's government has also announced it's imposing a 100% tariff on imports of Chinese-made electric vehicles. Canadian officials saying Chinese companies are making a clear effort to generate a global oversupply. Canada's move comes weeks after both the U.S. and the European Commission announced plans to impose higher import tariffs on Chinese EVs. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada also will impose a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum. A former Canadian ambassador to Beijing says there will be retaliation. China has fined 7 companies for their involvement in an alleged tainted cooking oil scandal. The scandal raising concerns about food safety after it was found tanker trucks that previously carried coal oil then transported edible oil without being properly cleaned. Among the companies fined, a total of $1.5 million, a unit of the state grain stockpiler, China Grain Reserves Corp., also known as Sinograin. It received the largest penalty. Besides the fines, authorities arrested and filed criminal charges against 2 drivers involved in the transportation of the alleged tainted oil. The investigation reporting that out of 67 tons of contaminated oil transported, portions were sold in Inner Mongolia and used for animal feed, while the rest was seized before reaching consumers. And U.S. officials are looking to grow pork exports to Colombia. U.S. Meat Export Federation and USDA officials are recently sitting down with their Colombian counterparts in an effort to smooth some import challenges in the country. U.S. representatives at the meeting offering farm to fork a view of U.S. meat industry to give the Colombian officials a better understanding of USDA's food safety oversight.
The difference between Colombia and the U.S. is that the Colombia has very few federally inspected plants, and in our country, almost every, and especially every large plant, is federally inspected, and the infrastructure is very large and very effective. Another key difference between our industries is HACCP is not mandatory in many countries, including Colombia, but in the U.S., if you're federally inspected, every facility is mandatorily using HACCP as part of their day-to-day operations.
HACCP, which stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, it's a food safety management system. As for Colombia, it is a major destination for U.S. pork, with exports right now on a record pace to the country. Through the first half of the year, shipments jumped 33% from the year prior. All right, that's a glimpse of ag around the world this Labor Day weekend. Up next, fertilizer prices are a head scratcher, but is there any relief in sight? That's Chip's Corner next.
Chip's Corner on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Research. Maximize your valuable fertilizer investment with Research, an exclusive low-dust humic granule from Helena.
Welcome back. Chip Flory joining us for Chip's Corner now. Chip's been on the road for Merck Animal Health Days, but made it back into the studio. And Chip, as we head into fall and head into harvest, there's a lot of talk about fertilizer prices. We've seen fertilizer prices drop significantly from their highs in 2022, but we have not seen fertilizer prices drop at the same rate as we've seen commodity prices.
Yeah, and when we're measuring it against the price of corn, no, fertilizer prices participated in the inflation and haven't participated in the deflation that corn has seen over the past year. So there are a lot of issues happening around the globe that are having a big influence on the price of fertilizers, potash, phosphorus, nitrogen. They're all a global market right now. And these global influences, with some changes in how India is approaching the market, changes in how China is approaching the market, it's all acting as a rising tide for the fertilizer market right now. So if you're sitting back and thinking, you know what, I'm just going to wait. Yeah, this corn prices come down, fertilizer prices are going to follow it. That may not be the case. That is according to Josh Linville. Davis Michelson had Josh on the show earlier this week. Josh is from StoneX Group. He's their fertilizer analyst there. And basically, he said, do not anticipate that setback in fertilizer prices for this fall. And as a result of that, a lot of producers are considering their alternatives for the year ahead. Can they skip a year?
And unfortunately, a lot of people sitting there saying, well, I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to use that. And listen, all the better if you can do that, not impact that overall yield. But the problem is, it's not just one crop that's going down as far as price. Everything is going down. So we look to 2025, our crop acreage estimates are not changing. That means things like nitrogen demand is staying about steady. Potash demand, we think steady. Phosphate demand could be down, but there's enough world events that, frankly speaking, we could be down here and the rest of the world kind of chuckled and said, yeah, drop your price. We'll take every ton of yours that you can export.
Yeah, and that's the problem. That's another part of the issues when we're talking about it being a global market. The U.S. fertilizer suppliers are going to sell to whoever is willing to give them the most profit. And if that profit is outside of the U.S., they will export fertilizer to whoever is willing to pay the most for it. So, Tyne, you and I have talked about this several times. It's about profitability, not so much on the 2024 crop, but that 2025 crop. Farmers can take a punch in the nose, and they've taken punches before. But when the markets start breaking legs, that's when it gets a little more difficult. And 2 years in a row, of losses would be a difficult scenario for a lot of farmers to take.
Yeah, we've been talking about that, and no
Mhm.
safety net that accurately reflects the situation that farmers are facing. Okay, real quick
Right.
though, Chip, there are some wild cards. One of those, the rail situation in Canada, and I know they're in arbitration. I know that, but
Mhm.
it seems like this is far from over. Now we have one side that's threatening legal battles, so we have that, and there's a significant amount of fertilizer that has to be shipped via rail.
Yo, absolutely. And Canada's fertilizer production is in the middle of the country. It's not like it's close to the coast where we might be able to get it onto a boat and move it into the US ports. No, it's got to come by rail. And if they have a labor issue in Canada that turns into any delays in Canadian fertilizer coming into the US, it's going to be reflected via higher prices in the US.
All right, Chip Flory, you can catch him twice daily, 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Central for AgriTalk AM and AgriTalk PM. All right, when we come back, talk about one job on the farm that is extremely labor intensive. That's hauling hay and baling hay. But thanks to some mechanization in the 1860s, it did make that job a little easier. We travel the countryside next with Andrew McCrea. If you think putting up hay is a labor-intensive job today, you're right. I am not going to argue with you there. But it's nothing compared to what was required in the 1960s. Hay trolleys were a key piece of farm machinery from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century and were used to move hay from wagons into barns for storage. And they were also used to hoist hay bales into hay lofts. And as Andrew McCrea shows us, the invention modernized the hay industry, easing the load on such a laborious job.
In the early days of this country, farmers put up hay by hand, everything from cutting and raking to using a fork to pitch it in the barn. But as horsepower replaced manpower, people were still looking for the best way to get all of that hay lifted into barn lofts.
Surely there's got to be a better way to do that than forking it up there the European way. So a lot of the early inventors, including Bill Loudon, who is from here in Iowa, started inventing block and tackle systems.
That block and tackle system relied on what is known as a hay trolley that ran on a track in the top of the barn. A rope and grapple could be lowered to pick up the hay, then lift it with horsepower, and the hay trolley rolled down the track and the hay was dropped where desired in the loft. Steve Weber began collecting these trolleys after seeing some that had been restored at a neighbor's sale. He says most people don't realize just how vital these mechanisms were to farming and the general public.
The way people got around was on horses, and horses eat hay, so if you didn't have hay, you didn't go anywhere.
And the ability to put up hay more efficiently was a huge benefit. Steve says New York State was initially the biggest hay producer because of the tremendous need to feed all of the horses used for carriages in New York City. Making hay trolleys became big business as well.
There were at least early on 12 very successful commercial manufacturers of hay trolleys, and they were just like Ford and Chevy and Chrysler. They all had their product lines, they all had to improve them, they had to get new patents.
Steve says when he began collecting hay trolleys, there were only about a dozen or so folks doing this across the country. Today, a look around his barns reveals many of the names of those manufacturers and the various designs they used to try and stay ahead of the competition.
They're small, they're affordable, they're mechanical, people can work on them. We have a lot of people with engineering backgrounds. Grandpa or grandma lived on a farm. So they relate back to the fact that it was part of the agricultural history.
Steve is amazed by the number of people of all ages who are collecting today. Here at his homestead, he has a few private barns with gorgeous displays of hay trolleys he's restored, about 350 in all. He focuses on the harder to find ones these days, and Steve has much more than hay trolleys here.
In the case of Hunt, Hellman, Ferris, Harvard, Illinois, they were a fairly major manufacturer of kids' toys, and they made sleds and wagons and other things.
He has several of those sleds and wagons manufactured by the same companies making hay trolleys, plus seats and much more from early equipment. He enjoys seeing the number of young people now interested in this piece of history. In some ways, it's the perfect farm item to collect.
I tell you, they're as celebrated, a $50 one is as celebrated as a $5,000 one, and that's the beauty of hay trolley collecting and the group of people that are preserving this part of our farming history.
Even though the trolleys in Steve's barn may speak to agriculture's past, it's truly a subject for the present and future, with collectors of all ages scouring barns across the nation to find a unique piece of farming history. traveling the countryside in rural Iowa City, Iowa. I'm Andrew McCrea.
You can watch more of Andrew's travels and tales on Farm Journal's YouTube page. He has a fascinating one on Billy the Kid. I encourage you to go check that out. All right, a fantastical fleet that's a treasure trove of tractors from the farm is next. Well, you Convet Machinery Pete would love to check this out. A fantastic fleet of farming tractors in Nebraska, some which date back to 1939. Well, this impressive collection, which also includes more modern machinery, was put on display to celebrate the 80th birthday of owner Wayne Dreesen. He started farming right out of high school and in the time since has not only collected an impressive 51 tractors, but also his own fleet of 4 generations of family farmers. What an accomplishment. And we're actually hitting the road next week, traveling to Nebraska to kick off our 2024 U.S. Farm Report Beck's College Roadshow. So we'll start things off next week at the University of Nebraska, and then Clinton is actually heading for Ag Day to Purdue, and then we will be at Iowa State. You can find the full list of where we will be heading for this year's College Roadshow right there on your screen. We're excited for another year of showcasing some of the best of the land-grant universities across the country. Well, that does it all for U.S. Farm Report this Labor Day weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us next weekend as we hit the road to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.